Good morning and welcome to the Corporate Governance and Audit Committee. We have received, you can go, just wait for this to pass. Sorry about that. So good morning and welcome. Unfortunately, the Chair of Corporate Governance and Audit Committee has sent her apologies, but has nominated Councillor Ray to be elected to the Chair in her absence. Could I ask if all members are agreeable to this? Thank you. Councillor Ray is formally elected to the Chair for the duration of the meeting.
Good morning, everyone. Just bear with me 2 seconds while I just get the papers up I need. If I can remember the password to my computer, that always helps. Right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Corporate Governance and Audit Committee. My name is Councillor Paul Ray, and I will be chairing today's meeting. Today's meeting is being live streamed on the Council's website so that the public can observe the meeting without needing to be present. I'll now invite members and officers to introduce themselves. Please remember to turn off your microphone once you have introduced yourself, and I will go in this direction.
Morning, everybody. So Jonathan Foster, I am the Senior Head of Audit, Corporate Governance and Insurance, and today acting as Lead Officer to the committee.
I'm Kate Sadler, Principal Corporate Governance Manager.
Hi there, Councillor Hannah Bithell representing Kirkstall.
Councillor Jules Heselwood representing Wheatwood Ward.
Councillor Ray Jones representing Horsworth.
Morning, Rebecca Roberts, Legal Officer.
Good morning, Tim Rollett from the Council's Intelligence and Policy Service.
Morning all, Aaron Linden, Head of Information Management and Governance.
Morning, Angela Laycock, Head of Finance Internal Audit.
Morning, Mary Hasnip, Head of Finance in Corporate Financial Management.
Morning, everyone. Victoria Bradshaw, Chief Financial Officer.
Morning, Richard Ellis, Deputy Chief Officer, Financial Services.
Morning, Chair, morning, members. Gareth Mills, I'm the Engagement Lead from Grant Thornton, the Council's External Auditors.
Good morning, Perminder Sessi, Grant Thornton, External Auditors.
Good morning, Linda Wild, Independent Member.
Good morning, Councillor Trish Smith. I represent Pudsey Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Conrad Hartbrook. I represent Rothwell.
Good morning, Billy Flynn, Councillor for Adlam Wharfdale.
Good morning, Debbie Oldham from Governance Services.
Thank you for that, everyone. And just before we move on to the agenda formally, just for clarity, I am the Deputy Exec Member for supporting Councillor Cooper and Strategy and Resources. So just to be clear, I will be looking at these conversations impartially and from a non-political perspective. And to remind members, particularly those subbing or are new to the committee, we don't do politics with a big P here. This is about the procedure and the structure of the council and our scrutiny of how that operates. If you'd like to move on to agenda number 1, please, item 1.
Thank you, Chair. It's actually agenda item number 2. So there are no appeals against the refusal or inspection of documents. Agenda item 3, there's no exempt items. Agenda item 4, there are no formal late items. However, there has been supplementary information which all members should have received, and I have provided some paper copies as well. In agenda item number 5, could I ask for members' declarations of interests? And I take silence as there are none. Agenda item 6. Apologies have been received from Councillor Franzmere and also Councillor Almas. Councillor Jones is in attendance today as Councillor Almas's substitute. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. So moving on to the minutes of the last meeting. First of all, are the minutes of the last meeting a correct record for the meeting held on the 26th of June? I will take silence as a yes. Fantastic. Any matters arising?
Okay, so matters arising. There were a couple of items from the internal audit update report. So question from Councillor Biffle around key decisions, and also some questions around the counter-fraud arrangements. So an update was circulated in respect of those on Friday last week. In terms of actions from previous meetings, I think there was a query from Councillor Dowson on IR35 that has now been completed and responded to. There's one outstanding item around privileged user access that is at the very final stages now in terms of agreeing the response there, alongside actually the internal audit report into that. So we expect to be in a position to circulate that imminently.
Councillor Biffle.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder, based on the minutes, it came to my attention just how much we spoke about sort of the IT, IDS-based digitalisation stuff. I imagine, based on the remit of this committee, that it isn't appropriate to invite them here, but I wonder whether it's appropriate to contact the relevant scrutiny and ask and explain the interest that we've got and that it's coming up regularly in the committee, and ask for direct communications from that scrutiny around what's going on so we can be kept abreast of it. Thank you.
Bring Kate in.
There is actually an annual report that comes to this committee from IDS in terms of the governance arrangements that they have in place. I forget when it's due, but it's, I think, January, February time on the work programme. So there will be that direct opportunity to ask those questions at that point.
I think it's also a valid point that the chair of this committee and the scrutiny chairs do engage on a regular basis, because there will be work that crosses both kind of areas of oversight. So I think it's a valid point in itself, but Kate says that they will be bringing a report. Any other Councillor Flint?
Doing what Hannah said, they rarely turn up for these kind of meetings, and in my view, it's essential that they do, given the fundamental reforms that they're putting in across the council. Okay, thank you.
I think that's points noted, and we'll speak to the chair so that she can have that conversation with officers and also the relevant scrutiny chairs, just to make sure that's on their agenda as well. Any other questions or comments or matters arising from that? No, thank you very much. So item agenda, it will be 8 in your pack, but it's actually number 9 because the election of me as chair was number 1. The internal audit annual report and opinion.
Thank you, Chair. So the public sector internal audit standards require the head of audit to deliver an annual internal audit opinion and report that's used to support the council's annual governance statement. And you'll notice that the interim AGS is on the agenda later on. So going back to our annual report and opinion. So this summarises the work that's been undertaken over this year, and it provides the committee with our annual opinion on the control environment. So in doing so, it details the totality of the work that we've undertaken, and that includes audit reports that have been issued, the various other sources of assurance that we draw on during the year, and the work that's substantially complete as well. So details of that can be found in Appendix C to the report. So last month, when I gave the update report, I did allude to the fact that it's been quite a challenging year this year with restructuring and some key staffing changes. And members will be aware, obviously, that I've recently taken up the post of Senior Head of Audit, Corporate Governance and Insurance. So for the purpose of this report, this means that I do now occupy the role of the Chief Audit Executive as referenced in the standards. So the opinion that we give is my opinion here. And having navigated our way through that year and the challenges that was posed, I am confident in the breadth and depth of the coverage that we've got this year to inform that opinion for the year 22-23. So that opinion remains satisfactory, and that's a testament, I feel, to the work of officers across the whole authority in some very challenging circumstances. Of course, during the year, we have identified opportunities and areas of weakness, opportunities for improvement there. And I think that's part of the cycle of continuous improvement in the control environment. It demonstrates the value that we add as an internal audit function. It also does underline the effectiveness of our risk-based planning process. So we focus a substantial portion of our time on the areas where there will be opportunities for improvement. But that's also balanced with the fact that there are some really positive assurances to give throughout that. And I did touch on the review of organisational culture at the last meeting. So Appendix B to this report summarises the information in respect of our own resourcing position and the activities that are underway, if you like, to support the continual improvement of our own section. And this does provide the committee with the assurance on the arrangements that we have in place to deliver our work in accordance with the appropriate standards. So we have a very rigorous quality assurance process, which is well established within the section. And we do invite an annual external inspection of this. And that certification that we've had has actually been successful since 1998, which I think again reflects very positively on our quality management system and our ability to deliver the product in line with the standards that we're required to. So we have continued to receive some excellent feedback through the questionnaires that have been raised at the conclusion of each audit. So the table in the report summarises the responses that we've received over the year. So members of the committee will have received these figures incrementally during the course of the year. I did discuss at the last meeting that we are looking at ways of streamlining and simplifying the feedback to encourage greater feedback in the future, and obviously take on board the comments that members raised at the last meeting to help us in doing so. I would say as well that we've also had excellent feedback informally through the audit process, not all of which can make its way into this report, but it does give me the confidence in saying that we are very well respected and valued across the authority for the positive and constructive challenge that we offer as a section, and the role that we play in helping the council to improve its control environment. So finally, I would like to take this opportunity to thank both the new chair of the committee and the previous chair, and all of the members who sat on this committee during the year for that constructive challenge that's been offered. We do welcome the positive challenge. It does help us to focus our attention in the right areas and keep that focus on that continual improvement of the control environment. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank officers across the whole authority for engaging in the internal audit process. Not easy at a time when resources are stretched, but I do feel we've had positive engagement there to help us in completing the planned work that we have, which supports this opinion. And obviously, lastly, I want to extend a massive thank you to our team, our audit and corporate governance team. So obviously, I've only led this team towards the very end of the audit year, but I have been a part of that team throughout the year. So I am acutely aware of how hard everybody has worked to enable us to get into the position to deliver this opinion. It hasn't been easy, but I feel really proud of the efforts that everybody has undertaken. And I think it's a fantastic reflection on the team that we are able to be here delivering this the opinion today. So that concludes the presentation there.
Thank you. And just before I open up to questions, I think just to note from the committee's perspective and from my perspective last year as being chair, the amount of huge work that everyone across the piece is doing in extremely stressful and difficult situation where there's a lot of demands. So I'm going to open it up to members for questions and comments. Any questions or comments on that from anyone? You all did it at the freezer round. I'm going to go in that direction. So Councillor Biffle first and then yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, just on the table, I just wondered if there was any more information we could have on the overdue that aren't progressed. It feels like overdue with progress feels more acceptable to me, whereas overdue but not doing that about it feels pretty unacceptable. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I'm aware that the recommendation tracking position there is mixed. So I think that's a fair question. And without going into specific details of individual areas, there's a real mixture of reasoning for that. Some of which I think we can reflect on ourselves in the process that we have for chasing the recommendations, which hasn't been perfect by my own admission and is something that we're looking to improve. Obviously, the onus there is very much on the services to complete the trackers, but there's probably more that we can do to help that message cut through. There are recommendations in there where no progress has been entered, but we are aware, for example, that in certain areas there is restructuring of that service, which is very much kind of dependent on being able to take the action. So it may not appear to be in progress, but it's dependent on actions that have been undertaken, and a real awareness there amongst officers in those areas who have discussed that with us. But we've tried to be just fair and impartial and accurate in the way that we've reported that in terms of what the trackers actually represent. Similarly, I would say that when I've looked at it again in detail over the weekend in preparation for this meeting, there are also some actions, for example, in financial services, where we agreed a recommendation around presentation of purchasing card information at dashboard level. Whilst we haven't got the update on there, which again, I think we reflect on that for our own process, I'm very much aware that that has been implemented. So there is a challenge for us, I think, continuing here, Councillor Biffle, to increase the engagement there. So I think your question is completely fair. It's something we're very aware of to increase that, and we are, and we have given the committee assurance previously that we want to introduce a sample checking process, mentioning the fact that this last year hasn't been easy for us to implement, say, some of the new measures to bolster this. That's something that I think we're wanting to bring in over the coming year. So it will also give us that route to really challenge back systematically, if you like, in the areas where the progress hasn't been recorded. So it's a mixture of reasons there.
Yeah. Sorry, I think I might have just misunderstood, and I just want to make sure I didn't. You just spoke about a specific one in finance, which is great. So it sounded like that's still in the not progressed, but actually has been implemented. So in that case, what's the tables? It's got an implemented column. I don't understand why it's not been moved across, or is it just a timing thing?
It's a timing thing, if you like, but a procedural thing as well. So we are not the owners of the control environment and the recommendations. Once we've issued those recommendations, the onus is very much shared across the council for implementation there. And we felt the right thing in the way that we introduced the tracking process was to put the onus there on the services for updating that. But I will say we haven't been perfect in the way that we have promoted that at the points that we are required to. So, for example, with the one there, we have not updated it, so it doesn't show as implemented. In actual fact, it is. That's one particular example there. So the implemented column is for recording that, and you could say it is a timing difference, but I'm going to reflect on that for ourselves in our promotion and chasing process and what we can do better there.
I think just before I bring Linda, I think it's point to maybe raise around something via the senior leadership team, that it's all well and good that they are, if you will, filling it in themselves, but if it ain't marked, it ain't there. And I think from a transparency point of view and a scrutiny kind of point of view per se, get the point that's been made, but that message needs to be reinforced that it's not a nicety for us to conduct the function of this committee properly. We need to know that they're filling in what they need to filling in. And maybe it's a conversation to pick up with Councillor Frances Smear when she's back, to pick that up with the relevant senior leaders. Lynn.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. Shall I do them all in one go? And then, so I'll go onto the actions ones first, and then I'll go back. I absolutely agree. It's important that we, as a committee, receive the right information to be able to take assurance that actions are being implemented. I love this table. I think it's great that you've brought this to us. It's a step forward. I think I mentioned at one of the previous sessions that we had about monitoring and reporting back on high and medium priority actions. What I'm still left wanting here is, are there any risks that remain unmitigated as a result of these actions not being implemented? And that's what I'm left wanting. If you could satisfy me and hopefully the rest of the committee by assuring us that high priority actions are indeed being implemented, because that's the main concern for me. But thank you for the table. I do think it's a step forward. So that's my point on actions. If I can just jump back to page 28, and you refer to a cyber security audit, a follow-up audit on paragraph 4.24. I appreciate you've not issued the report yet, so we won't have seen the outcome of that in any detail. But could you give us any assurance? Is there anything untoward or worrying on that piece of work. Cyber security is clearly a significant risk. And I'd just be keen to know what the findings were from that audit. Then on page 34, where we talk about fraud referrals, let me just get to page 34. Yeah, there's an increase in referrals this year compared to last. Is there any directorate that's more impacted than the other, or is it a general spread? It might be obvious in the report, but I've missed that. If that's something you could just help me out on. And finally, you'll be pleased to hear, at page 40, where we talk about money laundering in paragraph 5.18, and you talk about money laundering and fraud training. Just a question: is that mandatory training for the colleagues in the council? And if it is uptake of that training monitored? Sorry, I feel I've hogged the session, so that's it from me.
No, thank you. Thank you for the questions there. So just taking them in turn, and some of which I will draw on other colleagues as well. So in terms of the recommendations, and I am aware that you had raised wanting, I guess, more intuitive information to start to come through around the actions that have been taken. I will say the trackers themselves focus specifically on high and medium priority actions. The low ones are not part of the tracking process, so we've tried to be risk-based there in the way that we approach that. Now, I think that there are areas of the presentation of the information itself which we agreed that we would reflect on. We haven't had the opportunity to do that as yet. So I think in terms of I guess giving a bit more about those that are outstanding and the implications of that, I think that's something that we will reflect on. Again, just going back to the previous answer that I gave there, and to reassure, I am, having looked at some of those that are outstanding and not implemented, in many of those areas, they are resting on as well follow-up audits that we undertake there. So where we've given an opinion in full or part of limited assurance that has led to those recommendations, so there are issues of particular risk, we do also program in a follow-up audit in those areas. So we've actually got another thing to kind of reflect on, I think, in the recommendation tracking data, where the recommendations that we issue at a point in time and then follow up, at the moment, they're not necessarily dropping off the trackers, but they are then being replaced by other actions as well. But we do have that process in place for the particularly high risk areas where there's been a limited opinion, where we don't simply rest on the trackers to give the assurance. We have that follow-up audit process, and we do allude to that throughout the report as well to bolster our assurances in those areas. I'll take a couple of ones that I can answer first, so just going out of step here. So on the fraud training element of it. So the training itself is not mandatory. We have discussed the potential to do that, but at the moment we've determined that we think it's appropriate for it to not be a mandatory training, but on a risk basis, we do then go into and communicate with particular areas where we feel that there is a particular need to do that. And I think we do reference in the report as well around bank mandate fraud, for example. Those areas that are particularly susceptible to fraud risk, through our links into those areas, we do then actively promote the training and monitor the figures in those sort of areas. And I think figures on take up would be a valuable thing for us to bring back in the next counter fraud report, so we can show that by area as well. The question around the increase in fraud referrals, and I guess whether that is more specific to a particular directorate or service area, that's something I think I will discuss with our principal counter fraud manager and come back with. I know Kate might have an update on this, which I will come to now.
Just a very quick update from our fraud manager is that the increase is spread across all directorates. Can't tell you any more than that.
Just get my microphone back on. And on the cyber security audit issue specifically, I'm just going to pass that to Angela, who looks after that particular audit.
So in relation to cybersecurity, there isn't anything that's coming up that would need to be highlighted. We haven't, as I said, we haven't issued the report, but there are no significant weaknesses coming out of that review at the moment. We have looked at it more from the risk angle, but as I said, there's nothing of concern for the committee coming out of it at the moment.
Just one quick point I'd make just on the data coming through the fraud is numbers is one thing, but quality is another, because actually you can have a lot of referrals that actually aren't very good quality and therefore take up staff time. So there might be a bit of work around actually quality of understanding of what to refer, because there's no point in people referring hundreds of things and actually 99% of them actually not actually even warranting being looked at, because it's just maybe something to reflect on, bearing in mind the resource constraints we're under. Councillor Flynn.
Thanks, Paul. Jonathan, you may not have the level of detail I'm after here, but it's the adult health debt recovery process. Not exactly a ringing endorsement from you regarding it. There's not a huge amount of detail, at least that I could find in the report, about what that actually means. Could you tell us what the debt process actually, what kind of debt are we looking at here? And why was there a less than ringing endorsement of the process?
Again, I'm going to just go to Angela there, because I know Angela has led on that audit. She may not have figures at this particular meeting, but any update on the particular details of that audit?
So it's in relation to the invoices that we raised to collect service users' contributions to their care. So it's people who are either receiving home care or nursing residential.
Just, is this the MAC, at the 2-for-1 and MAC cap sort of limits that were introduced 2 years ago? Is it specifically to do with that?
Some of it is that, some of it is where people are deemed to, they have a financial assessment and they're deemed to have enough assets to contribute to their care. So we have to collect that from them. So it's in relation to the debt recovery procedures around collection of that debt, particularly with those service users.
Okay, I thought that's what it might have been, and it's not a matter for internal audit, I know, but it's a matter of concern to me that I think we were looking for about a £4 million clawback in terms of those two particular sort of items on adults and health. And I think we've achieved about 3 million at the moment. I'm more interested really in the impact it's had on the families concerned who've had to find the money to pay for the care that they got previously a lot cheaper than it is actually now. But I don't think that's a matter for internal audit, but it may be a matter for Adults and Health Scrutiny Board.
And that's something we can maybe ask Councillor Francis May to pick up with the relevant scrutiny chair if that's an area that they want to look in. I think there is also a question over the debt collection procedures and whether they're working as intended, which is obviously something by the sounds of it the audit is looking at. But perhaps maybe for next time that this is reported, maybe a breakdown between the impact of policy change without looking at the policy and actually, if you will, the mainstay of actually, because that then leads into other areas that then scrutiny may wish to take up separately with conversations between the scrutiny chairs and the chair of this committee. Councillor Biffle.
Thank you. A couple of questions from me. Around the initial, and a lot of these are just from a lack of experience on this committee, I have to be honest. So in terms of the first sort of block where it talks about the audit exec officer not being impartial, sorry, not being impartial. I just wondered how we know, because surely in a situation where an officer wasn't impartial, they'd still give the statement. So what is the process for us governance wise check in the governance of the governance?
I'll answer this one. Us, pretty much. I mean, our job here as this committee is to scrutinise the functions. So we have our colleagues from external audit, we have the other information that comes in, and partly I think it says, I know Jonathan will come in and probably give a bit more framing around that, but ultimately us as a committee to challenge actually whether or not our processes are working and that actually they're working in an independent way. I mean, one of the functions of this committee is to make sure that audit is strong and independent and can go into where it needs to go into the council to have those conversations. But I'll let Jonathan add a bit more context.
Entirely correct there around the function of this committee, but also around my reporting lines and direct access to those that I would need, for example, right up to chief exec level and then into this committee as well. And also at the more basic side of that, the declaration of my own independence in line with my professional standards. So obviously I am a professionally qualified chartered accountant. I am bound by my own code of ethics there. So if you take those sort of things in totality there around our independence, that is where I guess those assurances come from.
Thank you. And there was no suggestion that it wasn't the case. I just didn't understand how it just seemed like a sort of a tick box exercise. I'm glad there is something behind it. Can I also ask, in a lot of the tables, it talks about compliance versus control environments. Can I just check that I'm right, that control environments is sort of the rules that are in each directorate, and then compliance is how much do people actually do them?
Correct, yeah. I mean, a control is not necessarily just a rule. It may be a function, a process. It may refer to guidance, all sorts of different areas of a control environment. But you're right, really, in terms of our control environment will be around the arrangements in place to kind of support an outcome from happening. Compliance will be where we have tested in accordance with those controls. Are they working? And then are there issues to reflect on within that control environment? So has it been complied with? But we always then go back in the cycle then to look at the control in the first place. Because I think if there are compliance issues, it's not good enough really to just say you should have complied with it, done it, do it. I think that is an opportunity to then reflect on how do we wrap around the strength of that control environment with the other areas as well. So I talk about training, guidance, oversight, monitoring, etc., to make sure that we have the right arrangements to get it right.
Thank you. And then just one final one, Chair. Yeah, so that links for me to my next point, which is around schools, because they seem to have really effective plans, but then relatively limited compliance. So I wondered if you could elaborate a bit on what's going on with that. And then I'd also really like to hear more. I thought the page 39, 5.13 was really interesting around the purchasing cards, because having worked in schools, that soft power of the who's authorising what is really palpable, I guess. So I'd be interested to hear a little bit more around that. Thank you.
Okay, so on the schools in general, and I think you're right to obviously query that in respect of the fact that there are the compliance issues that are very clear there in the table with the school audits that we've done. Now, a couple of points to note here, and I think I perhaps did mention this at the last meeting as well. To a degree, this is a reflection of the success of our audit planning process. So there are obviously a number of maintained schools within the authority, and we have a limited amount of audit time. So various information comes to us from both self-assessments that the schools complete around their financial position, from intelligence that we get through the school's finance team around areas where there may be a particular concern, and issues that come to light over the course of time. So we do specifically focus our attention on the schools where we're aware that there may be some areas of weakness to pick up. Now, with those schools, those issues in the control environment have led to the poorer compliance opinions there, have tended to be around some of the creditor payments processes and school voluntary fund issues, not necessarily huge issues in terms of value and value in terms of the amount of money involved there, but compliance issues nonetheless that do need to be addressed. And again, when we talk about addressing those in the round, we then have the route back to the school's finance team in terms of being able to promote good practice and actions across the piece, so that it's not just those schools that we've looked at that benefit from the learning there. We also have a route into the schools forum where we have the opportunity to share good practice and again key messages across the schools, so that where we have picked up those issues, which again our risk assessment directs us to, we have the ability to share the learning across the different schools there. So ultimately, I do feel that despite the fact that it does stand out obviously there around the limited opinions, I do see that as a success in our audit planning process and an opportunity for us to then share that better practice amongst the schools as a whole. Does that answer the question that you gave there?
Yeah, it does. And I guess it's also worth minuting the fact that the follow-up shows the impact that you guys are having, because it then becomes good and acceptable. Thank you.
And sorry, microphone again. On the purchasing card issue specifically, I think that's one I'll just have a look into and then come back to members of the committee separately.
Councillor Dowson.
Just quickly on one of Councillor Bittell's previous points. As councillors, we have our interests recorded and we have to declare personal and prejudicial interests, and it's publicly available on the website, our interests. I'm wondering if you could just tell us what officers, because obviously for transparency, and again, we're not suggesting that you're not transparent in any way, but just for the general public, do officers have to declare personal and prejudicial interests, and does the council hold any kind of register about interests for officers?
The council does have its own register of interest processes as well. So officers in what are deemed to be the higher risk posts, whether that is seniority or potential positions of influence, are required to at least annually make that declaration in respect of any outside interest that could influence that position. I myself actually completed mine just last week for the last year. So we have very similar arrangements in place in that respect, through which our own interests are declared.
Any other questions or comments? Are we okay to move on to the recommendation then? This is where he reads it out. So make sure I've gone to the right page. That always helps as well. So does the committee agree to the recommendation set out in the report to note that based on the audit work undertaken for 22-23, the internal audit control environment, including the key financial systems, risk and governance, is well established and operating effectively in practice? I'll take silence as an acceptance of that first point. There we go. A satisfactory overall opinion is provided for 2022-23 based on the audit work detailed within the report. Again, I'll take silence. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks, Paul. Just a clarification on satisfactory and where that sits in the, there's usually 4, I think, markings or whatever, you know.
Yeah, if you, yeah.
On this occasion, we have either satisfactory or a unsatisfactory, i.e. a conditional opinion. So it's one or the other, really. There isn't a sliding scale in this context where we would give a good or a substantial.
Just for clarity, we're saying, are we satisfied basically they're doing the work and they're not that actually everything within there is perfect? So just to read that recommendation again, a satisfactory overall opinion is provided for 2022-23 based on the audit work detailed within the report. Again, I'll take silence as a yes. The work undertaken to support the opinion has been conducted in accordance with the established methodology that promotes quality and conformance with the international standards of the professional practice of internal audit, IPPF. Again, I'll take silence as a yes. I love a good acronym. And there has been no limitations in scope and nothing has arisen to compromise the independence of internal audit during the reporting period. Again, I'll take silence as a yes.
We had that statement from you, I think, when we did this report.
Yeah. Yeah. So silence is yes. Fantastic. So moving on to what would be item agenda number 9, is actually item agenda number 10, the draft statement of accounts.
Thank you, Chair. So the report presents the draft statement of accounts for 22-23. which at this stage in the process come to the committee for information rather than for approval. So I can confirm that the draft accounts were approved by Victoria in her capacity as responsible financial officer on Friday, and as of this morning, they're published on the council's website for the public deposit period. As you'll be aware from the report, the government had brought forward the statutory date for approving draft accounts this year by 2 months to the 31st of May. So obviously we haven't met that. As far as I'm aware, that's the first time this council hasn't met that statutory date for draft accounts approval. Obviously, if we were unusual or an outlier in terms of not meeting that date, it would be a cause for concern. But in fact, this year, around 70% of councils in England were unable to produce their draft accounts by 31st of May. So I think it's more of a reflection on the state we are in as a sector in terms of the audit and accounts process rather than any particular concern for the council. In terms of what happens next for the 22-23 accounts, so we're expecting Grant Thornton's audit of them to start at some time in the autumn. And I think the aim timescales now for the final audited accounts to be brought back to this committee, possibly in March 2024. It's at that stage that this committee would be asked to approve the final audited accounts on behalf of the council. So in advance of that meeting, what we will do is hold an informal briefing session for members to go into the accounts in more detail, sort of explain how the technicalities of the accounts relate to the reported outturn position, and that will give members a bit more of an opportunity to ask more detailed questions on the accounts at that stage. If I could just divert briefly into the 21-22 audit process, where you'll have a report from Grant Thornton later on in this agenda on that. At the moment, we're expecting the final audited reports to be brought back to this committee at the September meeting of the committee. So we will hold an informal briefing session for members earlier in September on the 21-22 accounts to go through those so that members have a full picture of them before they're asked to approve those accounts on behalf of the council. Turning back to the 22-23 accounts themselves then. So the biggest impact on the statements this year has been the pensions position. So because of the way the pensions liabilities are measured, they're discounted based on corporate bond rates. Because the yields on those bond rates have increased significantly during the year, that means that the present value of our liabilities as recorded in the accounts have increased significantly. In fact, we've actually got a net pensions liability as regards our West Yorkshire Pension Fund pensions, which has never happened before since this form of pensions accounting was brought in. So it's very unusual. I think the thing to stress there, though, is that the impact of that is on unspendable reserves. So it doesn't, although it appears to have massively increased the council's net worth, it doesn't for practical purposes have any impact on our available funding. And it doesn't affect our pension contributions going forward because those will be based on the triennial reviews which the pension fund actuaries carry out. Beyond that, our spendable reserves have reduced during the year. Obviously, one element of that was the 12.4 million overspend that happened during the 22-23 year. Beyond that, though, there are quite a few timing issues where quite often we get government grants and funding from NHS bodies in advance of spending them. So some of the increase in usable reserves is purely timing issues where we got the money in and have spent it as planned during 22-23. That was all I wanted to highlight. So I'll be happy to answer any members' questions on either the process or the draft accounts themselves.
Thank you for that. Any questions or comments? Councillor Flint?
I know there's a report coming in September, so perhaps we could have a bit more information on the reserve position at that stage. Okay. Yeah.
Any other questions or comments from members? No? Okay, quick agenda item then. So I'll go on to the recommendation. Members are asked to note the unaudited statement of accounts for 2022-23, which is to be certified by the Chief Officer. I will take silence as acceptance as normal. There we go. So moving on to item number 10 in your pack, which is actually item number 11 for this meeting, the Internal Audit Governance Statement.
So we're back to me again, and I've got the microphone on this time. So This report informs members of the annual review of internal control, which has been undertaken, and sets out our interim annual governance statement. So essentially, there's two key reasons for us bringing this report. So the first one is to present the corporate governance framework and assurance map. So the local code of corporate governance, which was adopted by this committee in March 22, states that this committee is responsible for oversight of corporate governance arrangements and will receive annual reports setting out the framework of internal control and mapping out the assurance available prior to approval of the council's annual governance statement. So the framework that you'll see in the pack there sets out what we do, and the assurance map sets out how we know that we do it. So we have 3 lines of assurance there. Firstly, the operational assurance. So that's the assurance from those with the day-to-day management and operational responsibility within the control framework. So this is derived largely through the survey of internal control, and in this year we've had quite an outstanding response rate there with 93% of respondents. We also get assurances there from reports that go to committees. Specialist assurance, so that's assurance from those with specialist oversight and control and responsibility and accountability for delivery of the control environment. So this again is derived through inquiries of those specialists, and again through reports that come to the committees. And then the independent assurance, so that's provided by those with no direct responsibility for delivery of the control environment. And examples would include internal audit, ourselves, the external auditors, Ofsted, the peer review and challenge that we get, and any other external inspections. So the second reason for bringing this report is to present the interim annual governance statement itself. So this is a valuable means of communicating and enabling the council to explain to the community, to service users, to taxpayers and other stakeholders around our governance arrangements and the arrangements that we have in place to manage the risk of failure to deliver our outcomes. So the first stage in the process here is the interim statement agreed and signed off by the Chief Finance Officer, which goes out to public consultation alongside the accounts. So there's an opportunity there to ask questions. And alongside that public consultation, there's the opportunity to consider the outcome of the review of internal control and to develop the action plan for the next year, where it's our intention there to focus on the big governance items, so not repeating other year action plans that are already subject to proportionate arrangements for oversight and review. So at this point, I'd again like to just take the opportunity to thank those across the authority that have completed the survey of internal control and led to that outstanding response rate, and the specialists whose knowledge and input has been really valuable there in helping to pull this AGS together. In particular, I'd also like to thank Kate Sadler for putting the building blocks in place for this report and the way that we do it, and also to Liz Gott, who's worked tirelessly really to pull this report together and put us into the position where we're satisfied with the steps that we've taken in leading us to be able to present the interim annual governance statement today. So in terms of the next steps now, we'll bring back the final annual governance statement in the autumn and ask the committee to review that. And then at that point, we will close off 22-23, and that gives us the opportunity then to focus on 23-24 governance arrangements. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Any questions or comments on that from any members? Ooh, silence again. Right, so moving on. Oh, did I miss someone? There we go.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I can be challenging, but actually I think this is really, really brilliant piece of work. And I just wanted it noted that in terms of help for members to be able to see the specifics, it's really good. And I love that it's got sort of the links in there and everything, so we can utilize it as sort of a working document. So thank you.
Fantastic. So moving on to the recommendations, are there any questions or comments? Make sure I don't miss it this time. No, there we go. So I've lost where I am now. Does the committee agree the recommendation set out in the report to note that the content of the internal audit governance statement? I'll take silence as a yes. We have a yes, that's great. So moving on to, it'll be item number 11 in your pack, but it's actually item number 12, which is the Grant Thornton Interim Audit Findings Report 2021-2022.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll just draw out some key messages from this report, and Perminda can take the committee through some of the points of detail. So this is we've badged it as a working draft version of the ISA 260 in respect of our work on the 21-22 accounts of the council. And our finalised version of this document is planned to come to this committee at the end of September. It summarises the audit work that we've concluded to date on the 21-22 accounts. And just going to page 5 of the pack, headed up section 1 headlines, we commenced the audit of 21-22's accounts back in March. So certain members will recall we signed off the 2021 accounts in February, and then we moved straight into the delivery of the 21-22 accounts in March. I would say that the audit is approximately 70% complete at the moment. Just to update that first paragraph on the right there. And as I say, an updated version of this report will come to this committee in September. And I think we've printed off an updated version of the first page for members, just to highlight that. I think a couple of things to say so far. I think we've made good progress on most of the balance sheet areas of the accounts. And I think the focus now is really on the income and expenditure areas of the audit. We are probably a bit behind where we wanted to be towards the end of July, but we were aware, obviously, finance colleagues were busy with the 22-23 draft accounts chair, which Mary's just presented. So I think there's quite a bit of work on both sides during August and September to get us where we all want to be in terms of concluding these accounts and the audit process by the end of September. There has been, in addition to that, a national issue, yet another national issue impacting on local government accounts, which is in respect of the triennial valuation of pension funds, and that's updated information which needs to be taken into account for those 21-22 accounts that still remain open. So that's impacting Leeds and a significant number of other local authorities across the country. And I know you, Chair, will be familiar with the backlog, I guess, nationally that's out there in terms of old year audits that are still to be concluded. So that's another issue that myself and Perminda and our team are working through with Richard, Victoria and Mary and finance colleagues. So as I say, we're aiming to conclude the audit by the end of September, bring an updated version of this report to this committee at the next meeting in September. I think it is worth just highlighting as well, though, over the page, Chair, on page 6 of the pack, that the value for money work, we are very keen that keeps up to date, Chair. So obviously you'll be aware that we reported our 21-22 value for money findings to this committee back in March. And quite often that work is seen as, I suppose, more impactful, more relevant, more interesting, I guess, for members, talking around the value for money arrangements in place at a local authority. And the plan very much is to keep that audit up to date. So we're planning to commence that audit during the summer with a view to presenting the 22-23 VFM report to this committee in November. And as Mary's mentioned in her summary, I think the 22-23 accounts audit is going to commence later this year with a view to concluding that in sort of March, Easter time for next year. So I'll just pause at that point, Chair. Perminda, I don't know if there's anything in terms of the detailed report that you wanted to draw out at this stage.
Thanks, Gareth. Just to add to Gareth's summary there, there is no matters that have come out so far that would impact on our proposed audit opinion, which is at the moment a proposed unqualified audit opinion. As Gareth mentioned, there are a number of areas that are set out on slide page 5 of the pack that we are still concluding on, including elements of our work on property, plant and equipment, payroll, payables, receivables, and so on. And also getting a draft updated version of the 21-22 draft financial statements, which incorporate the adjustments from the 2021 audited financial statements that we need to obviously go through and conclude on. Just drawing out some particular points. Moving to page 8 of the pack, we're required to bring to your attention the materiality for the audit, which is set out on the slide there, 26.898 million. Materiality levels remain the same as were reported in our audit plan from September of last year. Trivial matters, just want to draw out, is 1,345,000. So what that means is if we identify any issues above that amount, that is something that we do bring to the attention of the audit committee and of course management too, and will be included in the audit findings report. There are a number of significant risks that we have identified in undertaking our work. Two are presumed significant risks. I'm on page 9 of the pack now. One is a management override of control, which cannot be rebutted. This picks up on where management may be put under pressure to amend the outturn position due to reporting pressures that they may have. And we undertake a range of work in that area around looking at the effectiveness of management controls over journals in particular. And we actually identify unusual journals for testing. We also look at accounting estimates and critical judgments that management have formed to look at those to ensure that there is nothing that looks untoward in those particular areas, as well as looking to any changes in accounting policies, estimates, or unusual transactions. No issues have come out from our work so far in those particular areas. Over the page, the other area that we are required to look at for all audits is around revenue recognition and expenditure recognition. This is a rebuttable risk, and in our audit plan, we had rebutted this on the basis that there's little incentive for management to manipulate revenue recognition. The culture and ethical frameworks within the council and more widely within local government are quite strong, meaning that all forms of fraud are seen as unacceptable. So we revisited that rebuttal and we concluded that was still appropriate, but that doesn't mean we haven't undertaken any work in that particular area. The work that we've undertaken is set out on that slide on page 10. The particular significant risks that we undertake a fair degree of work on relate to the valuation of land and buildings, including council dwellings, which is on slide 11 of the pack. This obviously is a very large number in your accounts, over £5 billion, and of course is very sensitive to changes in any key assumptions. We set out on the right-hand side of the slide all of the work that we've undertaken so far and plan to undertake. No particular issues have come out from our work other than one that we've raised in previous years, which is around the valuation date for the valuation process, which has moved to the 1st of January each year, whereas the year end is the 31st of March. So we have raised a recommendation again this year that the valuation date should be moved to the 31st of March. So you're not in a position where you have to undertake work to support the valuation from the 1st of January to the 31st of March, a 3-month period. The next area which we identified as a significant risk is around the pension fund net liability. Again, a very significant amount within the council's balance sheet, and of course is very sensitive to the changes in any key assumptions. Again, the work that we've undertaken or proposed to undertake is set out on slide 12. And of course, the point that Gareth made around the triennial valuation coming through at the 31st of March has meant that the work we had undertaken, we need to re-perform now with the revised numbers. So there is work to do on that, which we will undertake in the next couple of months, but no specific issues have come out in that regard. There are a number of new issues and risks which are set out on slides 13 and 14, particularly around IFRS 16, which the council has reported, and we'll talk to them next year as part of the 22-23 audit, which doesn't come into play until 2024-25. We've undertaken work around the recognition and presentation of grant income, and obviously there were remnants of COVID grants in that regard. No issues have come out from that work to date. On IT general controls, our work, we reported this separately to you back in December, and that was presented to this committee in March earlier this year. Over the page, on page 14, infrastructure assets was a national issue last year. what that meant was that the value of infrastructure assets in local government needed to be amended slightly, and a statutory override was provided by the Department for Levelling Up, Housing and Communities, such that the council removed the gross cost and accumulated depreciation for the 2021 accounts. But because the 21-22 accounts had been prepared prior to that statutory instrument coming out, that amendment obviously needs to be made into 21-22 accounts in due course. We then look also at key judgments and estimates, and those are obviously around the council dwellings valuation, other land and buildings valuation, the net pension liability. No issues have come out so far, although this is all work in progress, so they've all been green rated on the slides. Any changes we'll bring to your attention at the meeting in September. Just particularly also drawing your attention to slide 19, the minimum revenue provision. This is an area of increasing focus for local authority external auditors following recent highly publicised challenges and problems at certain local authorities where the minimum revenue provision was found to be inappropriate. So the year-end MRP charge for Leeds for 21-22 was 68.7 million. This is a significant increase of 31 million from the prior year. We'd expect typically the MRP charge to be around 2%, and for Leeds it was 2.51%. So that is in accordance with our expectations of 2% or higher. So no particular issues to bring to your attention in that regard. Over the slide onto page 20, other communication requirements. We look at a range of other areas in relation to fraud, in relation to related parties, laws and regulations. No issues coming out from that. In terms of our review of the accounts, we identified a number of presentational disclosure amendments which are being or have agreed to be processed by management, and these are set out in the appendix, which I'll come on to a little later. And we've already talked around the timing of the audit. I think it's just worth drawing out here that we raised the content of working papers and the build-up of the numbers in the accounts in previous years. To try and help with that, we ran a workshop for officers within the finance department. Very pleased that over 100 finance officers attended that, and we hope that looking ahead to the 22-23 audit, that will help improve the quality of the working papers going forward. Slide 23, whole of government accounts. We're required to undertake specified procedures on behalf of the National Audit Office on the whole of government accounts. That work can only be completed once we've completed our audit on the financial statement. So once that has been done, that work will need to be undertaken. Slide 26, independence and ethics. There are no independence or ethical issues that we wish to bring to your attention. And then we get into the appendices. There are two recommendations I refer to, which are set out on slide 28. Management have responded to those, and their comments are included on that slide. We also followed up our prior recommendations, which are set out on slides 29 to 30, with an update on each particular area. Slide 31 are audit adjustments, which set out the impact of audited adjusted misstatements. There are no adjusted misstatements that have been identified so far. Over the page, there are misclassification and disclosure changes. So what that means is these are in the notes to the accounts as opposed to the main financial statements. Again, management responses are included. The TBCs on the right-hand side, once we have got an updated set of accounts, we'll be able to review and either put a tick or a cross in there, depending on the review and the changes made. Slide 34, impact of unadjusted misstatements. There are no unadjusted misstatements that we've identified to date. Our fees are set out on page 35, and then following that, we have the draft audit opinion and the draft letter of representation. I'll pause there. I've talked for a while, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that. Any questions or comments, Councillor Dowson?
Just quickly, and I can feel Councillor Trustwell's eyes from afar burning down on me, because this is always one of his pet subjects, and that's land valuation. You've made a recommendation that it moves to March, which seems to make perfect sense. And I've seen it referred to on page 11 and page 30 and so on. Does that mean it has been moved to March in future years, or is it still being considered?
If I pick that up first, Jen, I think Mary will probably want to comment in a moment. So we've talked quite a bit of this committee, Councillor Dowson, in terms of the level of work required both on the council side and the valuer side, and indeed on our side, to get to a position where we're satisfied there's no material error in the closing valuation of your land and buildings. And one of the ways that potentially makes that piece of work slightly more straightforward is to have a valuation date at the balance sheet date, because there's no debate there in terms of what happened between, in this case, 1st of January and 31st of March. So it's a recommendation we've raised at a number of authorities, and a lot of those authorities have moved their valuation date to the 31st of March. Now, we've had a number of discussions with finance colleagues on this, and as I understand it, and I'm sure Mary will comment in a moment, given the size of the asset base at Leeds and the work of the valuation team, they believe that the 1st of January is probably the latest that they can go with a valuation date in order to get the information completed in order to pass over to finance colleagues. So we've seen other authorities move to a 31st of March valuation date, and that worked quite well. But I think as things stand from the valuer's point of view, that's the latest that they can go with in Leeds.
Yes, just to echo what Gareth said, it's a practical issue, Councillor. In order to do a valuation as at 31st of March, you have to wait sometime after the 31st of March until the valuers have sufficient data as to what economic conditions were like as at 31st of March. So they can't start the valuations immediately. And due to the sheer number of valuations that need to be done for our accounts, if they were to take the data as at 31st of March, they simply wouldn't be able to value them all in time for the draft accounts. So we have a discussion with them each year as to what the latest possible date is that we could go for. But for the past few years, it has been 1st of January. We will be having another discussion with them in the autumn as to what the best date is that we can achieve for next year's draft accounts.
Yeah, listening to you, it does seem you'd seem to be saying that actually we're almost doing the work twice, in so much as we're doing it for January, and then we're also having to revalidate that work in March anyway. So that must take officer time. But also it would be really nice to know what other comparable authorities are doing. You've already said that some have moved it over. You might have an authority as big as Birmingham, but they might have fewer properties to value. So it would be nice to actually get that direct comparison.
Yeah, just before we come in, I think that was going to be the point I was going to raise. How do we compare to other core cities with similar sized portfolios and land ownership? Because obviously that's the big factor. If you own a lot, you have to have a lot of information. If you can be a big authority and you've outsourced everything and you don't own a lot, there's a lot less to do. But yeah, if you can quickly comment on that, that would be great.
Thanks, Chair. So in essence, Councillor Dowson's point is accurate, because there's an awful lot of work, as I say, for the valuer and the finance team at the 1st of January position. And then one of our key areas of focus on this audit is to be sceptical and challenge the valuation movement from then until 31st of March. So in essence, it is quite a lot of work for council colleagues as a whole to justify why that valuation in January is still relevant at 31st of March. So I think your point is a valid one. I will take that one away, Chair, in terms of core cities. And my other, I suppose, major audits, which are ones over 500 million, have moved to a 31st of March position, but they're not core cities. And we do, Birmingham, Nottingham, Bristol, etc. So I will check with colleagues, unless Mary may have already done that with equivalents at core cities, but I'll take that one away, Chair. Thank you.
No, I think that's appreciated. And I think it's one of these for the committee, that difficult balance between what would be ideal and what is actually doable in terms of resources on colleagues when there's obviously a lot of pressure. Any other questions or comments on that report from colleagues? Yep.
Thanks, Chair. Still on the same subject, really. Is there any opportunity to split the valuation to value a percentage of properties in January and a percentage of properties in March if it's too tight time frame to do them all in March? That might be a stupid question, I'm sorry, if that's the case. And my follow on really to that is, and I'm no expert in this by no stretch, but I understand property values and are decreasing quite significantly at the moment. What impact does that have on the valuation as at January and as at March? Would that, you know, does that impact the work that's required to justify the valuation being the right valuation in the first instance at the 31st of March? Does that make sense?
In terms of the first point of can we split the valuation date, I'd have to go back to the accounting code to double check, but I think we have to specify a valuation date in terms of our accounting policy as to what date we value properties at. Certainly, I've not seen any other council splitting the valuation date for different properties, but I will double check that.
And on the second point, in terms, just go through that second point again, please, Linda.
So, and again, I'm no expert, so but I was under the impression that property values are decreasing. Would that create even more work for officers and for yourselves to justify that change in valuation or not change in valuation?
So potentially, so one of the key things that we do in terms of our audit work to get to a position where we're materially comfortable at 31st of March valuation is very much to look at the various property indices for different types of assets, and there's different indices there for different types of assets that are valued on different bases. And if we see those indices are moving by a different percentage, shall we say, than what the Leeds Council valuers have moved their asset base by, again, there's a lot of challenge back and forth as to why, you know, the Leeds value has taken a particular decision that seems to be out of kilter with the regional indices for Yorkshire and Humber. Now, there's always special, you know, reasons why that might be justified, but again, there's a lot of challenge back and forth on that because it is such a key area of focus, particularly from the regulators that are reviewing the external audit work in local government. And whilst there's that level of oversight and challenge on auditors, clearly we will focus a lot of our audit resource and attention on areas such as property valuations. So there absolutely will be a lot of challenge on that. That said, there's a lot of national discussions going on at the moment, Linda, which you may be aware of, around how do we as a sector deal with the backlog of local authority audits that still need to be signed off across the country. And one of the areas that is potentially being looked into is how do we value fixed assets in old terminology, and is there a more appropriate way to do that potentially frees up audit resource to focus on areas that are of more interest to council taxpayers, to members, that impact on the proper usable reserves of a council, as opposed to directing at present a lot of audit resource into the valuation of land and buildings and the valuation of the pension liability, or in this, you know, indeed the pension fund asset, which ultimately don't impact on proper money, if you like.
Can I just add to that? I think we use an external valuer too, which supports some of the work that we do. So in addition to looking at the indices, we also speak to our auditor's expert to get his guidance in terms of where they think things should be, which again then leads to a bit more toing and froing in terms of with management to gain assurance around how that value has changed.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, if we can move on to the recommendation then. which is members are asked to receive the interim audit finding report presented by Grant Forden and to note the recommendations made. I'll take silence as a yes to that. Fantastic. Moving on to item agenda 13, which is number 12 in your pack, which is the corporate governance and audit work programme for 2023-24.
Thanks, Chair. So before we go into the work programme, I will just add that we brought the development programme to the committee at the last meeting. So I think now is probably a good time for us to start booking things in for member development. So there'll be a series of briefings and potential training courses and things like that that will start to come through. But then going back to the work programme, so this is obviously set out within this report, showing the reports that are due to come to committee over the course of this year. And I just wanted to pass over to my colleague Aaron in Information Governance just for an update in respect of the Information Governance report that's due later in the year.
Thank you. No, this is just to give the committee the heads up that we've had contact from the Information Commissioner's Office. That's the ICO, and they want to come and do a data protection audit of the council. We've not got all the details yet. The next we'll hear from them will be the first week in September, which is when we'll discuss the scoping of the audit, and that'll include areas of information governance, but also areas of the council that they want to look at. From then, and we'll get the specific details. We'll then have a few weeks to gather evidence of any controls that we have in place in relation to those areas. And the actual audit is due to be undertaken the first week in November. Now, they do hybrid audits, so we suspect they will be on site for a couple of days, but they will conduct interviews with relevant staff across that week. From when it's concluded, they'll have 2 weeks to turn around the report and issue that to us, and then we'll have a similar period of time to respond back to that. But ultimately, we'd be looking to put together an action plan, which is probably a 6 to 9 month action plan, taking us into new year. So the annual governance report is due in February. So I would suggest that's the time at which we would look to bring the first report in terms of the outcome of the audit, and then probably looked maybe 6 months after that to bring what I would hope to be a closure report. Good, thanks, Chair.
Any questions or comments from members? Okay, so moving to the recommendation. Does the committee agree to the recommendation set out in the report to consider and approve the work programme as detailed in Appendix A with the additional information we've also been provided about the other audit? Are we all happy with that? Okay. Item agenda number 13, you pack the number 14. Date and time of the next meeting. To note that the date and the time of the next meeting as Monday, the 25th of September 2023 at 10:30 a.m. And I conclude the meeting for today. Thank you for your time.